That'll be all right. The memory verse was 1 Chronicles 22, verse 19. 1 Chronicles 22:19. Now set your heart and your soul to seek the Lord your God. Obviously, a good reminder to us that what we ought to do, set our heart and soul to seek the Lord. Filling in the blanks, we've just got 5 questions tonight. The book of Chronicles was likely written by Ezra. Ezra, who was called the chronicler, to write down and chronicle the history of Israel and Judah. Number 2, the temple was a symbol of the nation's unity. That's right, symbol of the nation's unity. The temple was the place they were to worship. That's where God said he would meet them. And so as they came there to worship, they would be united together. Number 3, the ark represented the what of God? The presence of God. He said, this is where I will meet you. The mercy seat was this place where atonement took place. And so this was the presence of God. Number 4, out of the whole race of man, God chose one nation and then one tribe and then one family. So he chose one nation, one tribe, one family, and he established his covenant with them. And then number 5, David was not allowed to build the temple because he had shed so much blood. He had blood on his hands, and the Lord said, you're not going to be the one to build the temple. So that will fall to your son, Solomon. All righty. Any questions or anything that stands out in First Chronicles before we move on to Second? Anybody got any loose ends from First Chronicles? Okay, then we'll move on. We'll go to Second Chronicles tonight. Jewish tradition again credits Ezra the priest for writing Second Chronicles somewhere between 450 and 430 BC. We're going to have as our key verse Second Chronicles 16 verse 9, the first part of verse 9, which says, for the eyes of the Lord move to and fro throughout the earth, that he may strongly support those whose heart is completely his. A reminder that the Lord looks for those who are wholly devoted to him. They are consecrated to him, and they are seeking him with their whole heart. And that's what he desires of his people. Now, Second Chronicles is a sequel to First Chronicles, of course, but also it kind of supplements First and Second Kings. The book contains the history of Judah. Second Chronicles contains the history of Judah. It focuses solely on the kings from the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah. It intentionally excludes the 10 northern tribes. Anybody want to take a guess why? Because they're already in captivity. They've been carried away. And Judah is now about to follow the same pattern. They're going to end up in captivity as well. But the northern tribes had their rebellion against the Lord. They were living in wickedness against him. They had false worship that they included. And so therefore they were carried off into captivity. Now, on the whole, the book of Second Chronicles is a dark picture of Judah's instability and apostasy. But intermingled with that apostasy were some periods of religious reform. And the chronicler, Ezra, seems to omit anything that was negative or in opposition to the Davidic line. It's almost like as he was recording, he wants to just give you the good parts and not really focus on the bad. Where 2 Kings 25 ends with a down note with Judah being deported off to Babylon, this book ends with a glimmer of hope, a glimmer of hope, um, as it records for us Judah being released from Persia and returning to Jerusalem. We see that in chapter 36 and verse 22. Says, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, the king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout his kingdom and also put it into writing, saying, let the people go back and rebuild the city. And so this is kind of a glimmer of hope. They're going to be allowed to go back to their homeland. This book was written for the repatriated Jews. It depicts God's divine intention of future blessings in spite of their moral and spiritual failures, despite the fact that they rebelled against the law of the Lord and they did not keep his law. They are going to eventually be blessed because that was God's intention. And those failures remind us of two basic principles that prevail throughout the book. One is obedience brings blessing. Obedience brings blessing. Now, it's pretty obvious. God says that over and over again. Do what I call you to do. Do the commands that I've given you. So obedience brings blessing, and disobedience brings judgment. Disobedience brings judgment. Now, we see that in three major failures of the kings of Judah. Three basic failures that you're going to see in the kings of Judah. One was personal sin. You're going to see the kings of Judah again and again involved in personal sin, rebelling against the Lord, disobeying the Lord, personal sin. But a second failure was false worship. False worship. Now, that happens when God tells Judah, don't bring in those foreigners, don't intermarry with them, because you'll just simply bring in your foreign gods and worship them. And so there was false worship. And then the third failure was that they trusted in man rather than God. They trusted in man rather than God. They would seek the counsel of men. They would seek the counsel of other kings to come to their defense rather than trusting in God. But despite their checkered past, despite their current plight that we read through the book, God remained true to his covenant. God cannot fail, and God cannot renege on his covenant with them. Now, you can break the book down into two sections. We've done that. We've got the 40-year reign of Solomon, chapters 1 to 9. And then you've got the history of Judah all the way up to their captivity, chapters 10 to 36. So let's look at the two sections. The first one is Solomon's 40-year reign. We see national and moral significance of Solomon's reign. Listen to chapter 1 and verse 1. Verse 8. This is after Solomon is chosen and he's praying to the Lord. He says, you have dealt with my father with great loving kindness. You have made me king in his place. And now, Lord, your promise to my father David is fulfilled, for you have made me king over a people as numerous as the dust of the earth. Give me now wisdom and knowledge, that I may go out and come in before this people. For who can rule this great people of yours? This is at least Solomon at the beginning of his reign seeking the advice and the wisdom of God. And he asks for that, and it goes on to tell us he received three things. He received wisdom. He asked the Lord for wisdom. God said, because you have put it in your mind and didn't ask for riches, wealth, or honor, or life for those who hate you, well, nor have you asked for long life, but you have asked for yourself wisdom and knowledge, that you may rule over my people over whom I have made you king. Wisdom and knowledge have been granted to you, and I will give you riches, wealth, and honor. So he got not only wisdom, but he also got wealth. Solomon, we know, became probably the most wealthy king who ever lived. He had wisdom, wealth, and thirdly, he had power. He had power. God was so gracious to Solomon because Solomon started out with such humility. I don't know how to lead these people. I'm just a child myself, he had said. And God said, I'm going to give you wisdom, wealth, and power, even though you didn't ask for them. We read in 1 Kings chapter 3 that he was promised length of days if he would walk with God. In other words, he'd have long life if he walked with the Lord and stayed faithful to him. However, Solomon abandoned his walk with the Lord and he did not see long days. In the book of 2 Chronicles, we have a verse of scripture that we're probably all familiar with. And it has been quoted often by Christian people. And that's 2 Chronicles chapter 7 and verse 14. But you've got to take it in context because it is a principle. This was a promise that was made to Judah, the people of God, the people of Judah, his chosen nation. But I think there is a principle for us as believers. But verse 14 is, if my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. How often we have heard that used for our nation. And while again, I think there's a principle, this was a promise specifically for the people of Judah. If you go back to verse 12, it says, the Lord appeared to Solomon and he says, I've heard your prayer and have chosen this place for myself. If I shut up the heavens so that there's no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land and I send pestilence among my people, and my people who are called by my name humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I'll hear from heaven and I'll forgive their sin and heal their land. And my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to the prayer offered in this place. This is the context of the promise. God says, look, you have disobeyed me so often. If I shut up the heavens so that it doesn't rain, and if I bring this disaster upon you, if you turn and seek my face, then I'll heal your land. There is always a promise that God makes based on our obedience to him and our following his commands. And so this is where it comes. And again, I think this is a principle for the church, is a principle for our time. If God's people humble themselves and pray and seek his face and turn from their wicked ways, he'll send a blessing. But keep in mind, this blessing was specifically for Judah. Still, we want to seek the Lord. Solomon's reign has some distinguishing moments. His wisdom in seeking the Lord's direction, the building of the temple, the glory of the Lord filling the temple. You see that in chapter 5 when they dedicate the temple. Solomon's dedicatory prayer. This is where he seeks the Lord's face and seeks the Lord's favor as the temple was dedicated. God's second appearance to Solomon in chapter 7. Chapter 8 is Solomon's prosperity and fame, how he became very wealthy. And then by that time you get to chapter 9, you've got the Queen of Sheba who comes and says, I've got to see this. And when she saw it, she said, the half has not been told. I mean, you are far beyond what they told me about your wealth. So Solomon enjoyed the favor of God, the blessing of God, and Judah, once they returned to the Lord, they received his favor, but they didn't stay in the favor of the Lord. That's where we come to chapters 10 through 36. This is the history of Judah all the way up to their captivity. And there were 5 periods of reformation 5 periods of reformation during this time leading up to the captivity. But I want to make a note real quick. Um, in chapter 11, we read of Rehoboam, who was the son of Solomon, who became king after Solomon. And he followed in his father's footsteps in a number of ways, including the fact that he had 18 wives and 60 concubines. He was just like his father. And of course, those concubines and wives would bring in the foreign religions and be the downfall of Rehoboam and the people of Judah. Chapter 15, there is a reformation that is led by King Asa. King Asa. We read about Asa in chapter 15. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Azariah, son of Obed, and he went out to meet Asa. Listen to me, Asa, and Judah, and Benjamin. The Lord is with you when you are with him. And if you seek him, he will let you find him. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. That's just the way it works. If you seek him, God says, you'll find me. He says in Jeremiah, if you seek me, you will find me if you seek me with all your heart. But he says, if you forsake me, I'll forsake you. And so this is one stage of reformation. King Asa leads in a reformation to bring the people back to God. In chapter 17, verses 6 to 10, we read of another great reformation, this time led by Jehoshaphat, one of the more fun names to pronounce in the Old Testament. Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat. Jehoshaphat. That's chapter 17. In chapter 17 and verse 15, you read Jehoshaphat's prayer. I'm sorry, over in chapter 20, you read his prayer. He says, do not fear or be dismayed because of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. This was Jehoshaphat's leading the people and reminding them that God is with them and fighting for them. In chapter 23, there's another effort at reformation led by the priest Jehoiada and Joash, the king. King Joash. Now, again, these guys, these kings, Asa and Jehoshaphat and Joash, they're all good guys to start with. They are seeking the Lord and they're trying to turn the people of God back to the Lord. So this is Jehoiada and Joash the king. A fourth period of reformation is found in chapters 29 to 31, and this is under the leadership of King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah, chapter 30 and verses 6 to 9, we read about it. He sent couriers all throughout Israel and Judah with letters from his hand. He said, O sons of Israel, return to the Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, that he may return to those of you who escaped and are left from the hand of the kings of Assyria. You're coming back, and now you want the favor of God. So seek the Lord that he may be found. And then the final attempt at restoration was under the direction of King Josiah. King Josiah. Josiah was a young kid, 8 years old when he became king. And as long as he had advisors who sought the Lord, they were seeking after the Lord, and he was leading that reformation back to the Lord. And so 5 periods of reformation: Asa, Jehoshaphat, Joash, Hezekiah, and Josiah. And all of those who tried the reforms had temporary success, but the people eventually would turn away from the Lord. It seems that once a king was leading in reforms, once that king died, the people just went back to what they were doing before. And so they needed a permanent reformation that God only could bring. Now, in the Chronicles, we find a throne that was founded by divine covenant. God established the throne of his people. But we also find a temple founded by divine guidance. A temple founded by divine guidance. You had the throne by divine covenant and the temple by divine guidance. And they were to complement one another and to glorify one another. But we see the condition in Judah at the time became a time of great apostasy. Um, and then the throne became the worst enemy of the temple, because the throne, the kings, would overrule the temple and lead the people astray. And so one of them has to go. One of them has to go. Either the throne by divine covenant or the temple by divine guidance. One of them has to go, and it wasn't going to be the temple, because that's the presence of God. And so the kingship was going to fail. At the very end, we find that Judah is carried off into Babylonian captivity. The throne and the line of the throne is suspended, and eventually the temple was allowed to burn. And so this was great disaster for the people of God. In the two books of Chronicles, we see the full historical view of the Davidic monarchy, from the line of David all the way to the end and the captivity. We see a high calling. This is the high calling of God upon David and the kings. We see a great blessing that is given by God. We see the ill doing, in other words, the disobedience of the people of God. And then we see the bad ending as they end up in captivity. When a king would lead the people to honor God, there was peace and prosperity. And during times of unfaithfulness, there was adversity. Great adversity. Because there was infighting as well as fighting against the other nations. We see that unfaithfulness in chapter 36. And this is really just kind of the conclusion. In chapter 36, beginning in verse 14, it tells us under Zedekiah's reign, they were being carried off into captivity. And it says in verse 14, all the officials of the priests and the people were very unfaithful, following the abominations of the nations, and they defiled the house of the Lord, which he had sanctified in Jerusalem. And the Lord, the God of their fathers, sent word to them again and again by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. But they continually mocked the messengers of God, despised his words, and scoffed at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people, until there was no remedy. That's a sad commentary. That God wanted to pour out blessing on his people. He wanted them to turn to him, but they wouldn't. They continued to scoff, and they continued to despise him. They mocked the messengers and the wrath of the Lord. It kind of reminds us of Romans chapter 1, where it tells us that the wrath of God is being reserved for those who are disobedient. And so much so that God hands them over to their destruction. And this is what happened to Judah as they are finally taken away into captivity, all because of their adverse conditions with the Lord. Well, just a few things to remember. I've given you there 5 of them, but wisdom is the preeminent gift. Solomon didn't ask for money, didn't ask for health, he asked for wisdom. The third thing there is a tremendous power in the spirit of praise. When we offer our praise to the Lord, he strengthens and encourages us. And then there were 2 great prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah, who lived during the latter part of 2 Chronicles. So you see their ministry among them. And again, our memory verse is 2 Chronicles 16, verse 9. 2 Chronicles. I hope you enjoy running through there and refreshing your memory on what takes place among the people of Judah.